most of us, almost across the board, need to really incorporate more whole grains into our diet. And so what I would challenge everyone to do is just look at every source of grain that you're eating now and think, is there a way that I could switch this for a whole grain?
The USDA recommends eating grains daily, and at least half of those should be whole grains. Research shows that whole grains reduce risks of heart disease, stroke, cancer, diabetes, and obesity. However, even consumers who are aware of the health benefits of whole grains are often unsure how to find them and prepare them. On today's Sound Living, adding more whole grains to your diet. Sound Living is a weekly public affairs program produced by Research and Extension at Kansas State University. I'm Jeff Wichman. K-State Research and Extension Nutrition Specialist Sandy Procter says reading product labels is one way to start adding more whole grains to your diet. Sandy, first off, when we talk about whole grains, what constitutes a whole grain?
When you think about grain and how it's processed, basically, if you can think of that as a continuum, the least processed are going to be considered whole grains. They're going to be intact. We think of them as higher in fiber, sometimes different in color, like brown rice versus white rice. And so to work to eat more whole grains is to try to increase the nutrient variety from the grains that we consume.
And all of the studies are showing a lot of health benefits from the whole grains. It really runs the spectrum.
There really are a lot of benefits to it. And one of the things that I like, and I think is very interesting, is making at least half your grains that you choose each day whole really helps us actually get the best of all the worlds. Say half of our grains are whole grains, and that means we get the fiber and we get the naturally occurring nutrients in it. And then if we choose those other grains that are enriched, processed, we are going to get the folic acid and some of the vitamins that are added back to those grains that may actually be more than what were there originally. And we know that some of those nutrients, like folic acid, are issues, and we need to work to get more of them in our diets. And so by having half of our grains whole, we're really right at the top of the balance. We're getting the best of what's out there and available.
Let's go a little bit further with that. What can we do to incorporate more whole grains into the diet?
You know, sometimes it's just really being aware of some of the choices that we can make. For example, there are some delicious whole grain foods that people, if they knew they were whole grain or thought about it more often, would probably have more regularly than they do now. For example, oatmeal. Even instant oatmeal in a package is considered a whole grain. So right there, incorporating a bowl of oatmeal into your day, you've already, starting off the day with breakfast or as a snack, however you want to work it in, it's right there. Another thing that I just consider almost a guilt-free whole grain is popcorn. No, it doesn't have to be prepared with added fat or salt. Just popcorn in its own basic plain self is a whole grain and very low in calories in its original popped form. So 100 calories of popcorn is really quite a large serving, around 3-4 cups, I think it is. And so that's a filling snack that's a whole grain. And if you got people in your family that are just really determined not to have whole grains, some of these, they're not even going to realize that they're making the right choices.
And some of those, it comes down to reading the label to make sure that you're getting the whole grain and that you're avoiding some of those processed foods like you were talking about, because there's about, 20 different kinds of popcorn on the market.
Well, exactly. And Jeff, you really touched on, I think, the core of all nutrition, and that gets back to reading the label. It really does. And we know that if we spend time actually thinking about what we put in us, whether it's snack foods or, we are cooking meals from scratch or doing some sort of speed scratch cooking, or just at the point of purchase at the grocery store, choosing between this grain food and that grain food, or as you said, this popcorn and that popcorn. It really does get down to the things that are added, the things that are maybe substituted, this healthier fat for that one, or this is a low-salt version of the same thing. And so sometimes those decisions really can improve our nutrition and not add any cost, even any cooking time, or any other negatives to our meal preparation.
Bread is a big source of whole grains. There are, again, a number of breads on the market, and the marketers can be clever, so you really need to make sure that you're getting what is, in fact, a whole grain.
That's true. And when you look at that label, that's going to tell you, because that ingredient, by law, has to be listed that the first ingredient says that it's a whole grain. So it will say whole wheat or whole oats. Whatever that whole grain is would be listed as the top ingredient. It has to be 51% of the total to be a whole grain food. And so you can see foods that'll say rich in whole grains, or you can see ones that'll say featuring whole grains. But if you look at the label, that may just be sort of a thing to sucker you in, since today's sort of emphasis is on whole grains. But in order to really tell how much you're getting, you need to take a close look at that label and see what that first ingredient is. Because if it's a brown-looking bread and it looks like it might be, just what you're looking for, but that first ingredient is enriched wheat flour. Enriched means it's processed. It started with white flour, and they've added back in some good nutrients, but it's not majority of whole grains.
And sometimes we see something called multigrain, which we think that must be better because there's multiple grains.
Yes, and they can all be processed. So it really matters, again, to look at that list of ingredients where they're listed in order by the highest percentage, and those first ingredients are the real tellers. You can have something that will say whole wheat flour. If it's clear down as part of the ingredients after many other ingredients, you know that that's not going to be considered a whole grain food.
One of the other areas where I think we see the addition of the whole grains is in pasta. That's a real easy substitute for most people, and the taste is really not that different.
A cook, I can tell. Yes, they're actually improving. There's a lot of effort that's going into improved whole grain pasta products. And another one that we're seeing a lot more of, and I'm really pleased to see, is brown rice, available at a lot of point-of-purchase or restaurants. For example, some of the local burrito-type restaurants, you now have an option of brown rice or white rice. This is a simple correction that my ever-patient husband was able to make not too long ago. And you'll see it also sometimes at some Chinese food restaurants or some Asian restaurants where brown rice is available in addition to steamed rice or fried rice. Well, when you think about that, there is a whole grain that's just going to be readily available, similar in flavor, although I would argue it's even better because it has kind of a nuttier, more textured flavor to it. Usually there's not a difference in price. It's right there. And there is a serving of whole grains that you might not have had before. I, at home, find that sometimes it takes longer, I know, to cook brown rice. So I keep a box of minute brown rice on hand because in a pinch, it's still a whole grain. It's processed, but it's been processed with that whole grain on. So there are sort of quicker versions available. One of the ones that I really enjoyed pointing out to my son was he really likes oatmeal. And as I said, all oatmeal is whole grain. But you now even can get quicker cooking steel-cut oats that take normally 20 minutes to cook in a quick cooking 3 to 5 minute version. Whole grain, very nice texture that people who appreciate whole grains would like to have, but may not always have the 20 to 25 minutes to cook. And so there are options available out there for those of us that are time crunched, but nutrition conscious. Like you said, the breads are more available. It takes just a little bit of reading on the label. Sometimes an easy go-to is one that says 100% whole wheat bread. That, to me, tells me what I need to know without reading the fine print.
Well, the good thing is once you've read a few labels, a few trips through the store, the next time you know which one to grab.
With a caveat, I would be real careful because things do change, and it's important to keep checking those labels. But at least at that point, you know where to start, and you look at that label and you confirm that choice is still what you think it is. Because, like you said, manufacturers, they're not necessarily there to make it easy on us to make the best choice, but they are there to sort of capture our choices. And so it's up to us to be that discerning shopper.
Are there some other ways that we can incorporate these whole grains into the diet, maybe through meals, other preparation methods?
One that I like doing at my house is trying some of the different grains that are available and using, instead of maybe where I would traditionally have a potato or a white pasta or a white rice, using some whole grains like maybe barley or bulgur in some capacity, as part of a casserole or a stir fry. I really like the texture that it adds, even the way it looks on the plate and the variety of the flavors. And so there's some nice things that are added to it. And if you're baking, you can substitute pretty successfully almost in every recipe up to half of the white flour with whole wheat and not affect the quality of your product. And so that's an easy way to increase the amount of whole grain in your normal recipes. You can change whole wheat breadcrumbs for white breadcrumbs in some of your breading and things. And then the one I always encourage people to do is think about a whole wheat bun. One of the places you really don't see it is a lot of fast food places. And, you just see a lot of white bread and white buns. Take some time to find out where some of those alternatives might be. Or instead of a bun, can you get a tortilla? And if you can get a tortilla, corn tortillas are whole grain. Just like corn chips and some of those things that we know are sort of snack foods are also whole grain foods. And so there's a way maybe to combine some of those little pleasures in our diet and know that we are really increasing our whole grain choices.
And how many choices should we be making each day? What's the recommendation?
Now, that's going to vary depending on our calories. And if you look at my plate just as a visual, it shows us that about 1/4 of our plate every meal should be a grain serving. So think of that as maybe the base of a casserole or a component of the meal. Not necessarily then that and a slice of bread. That's where a lot of us, I think, in this country, we sort of overcarb ourselves, not because of any diet or anything that we're talking about, but simply just too many calories. And a lot of times those calories are in the form of a processed or a white grain rather than a whole grain. So about 1/4 of your plate on average should be considered a grain food. And then if we think that half of those every day ought to be a whole grain, that's a pretty good rule of thumb.
So really there's a lot of ways to get these added grains. It's just a matter of taking the time to make that conscious decision?
Sure. If you have cereal every morning for breakfast, it's really the gamut for whether you have the wholest of whole grain cereals that's got, an amazing amount of whole grains all the way down to cornflakes or puffed rice or something like that, Rice Krispies. Those are going to be at the very processed end, the very low end, whereas you can go easily to making your choice a Cheerio-type food or a Chex-type food. And I'm not giving brand names as much as talking about the wheat Chex and bran Chex and some of those things. And just looking for those same ingredients on the labels, that the first ingredient is a whole wheat or a whole barley or a combination thereof. And the choices are wide out there for high whole grain containing foods.
What about in terms of snacks for kids after they come home from school or on the weekends when they just need that kind of between meal snack?
Depending on where that fits into their plan, I probably would go back to thinking maybe not a bread or a grain at all for many snacks. A lot of times fruits and vegetables really need still that focus, and you knew that was going to come up in this discussion somewhere. But if you're aiming at a grain for a snack, there is popcorn, and there is the really neat little sandwich rounds or things that can work for like a quick peanut butter sandwich or a snack along those lines. A non-traditional choice might be a pasta salad that's got some vegetables or something mixed in, even fruit that's ready to go in a small container that is easy for some hungry person to grab for a quick snack.
Maybe just to recap, really check those labels. That's kind of where everything starts, and then maybe just kind of slowly start adding a little bit more, and you'll finally hit where we need to be.
I think so. Most of us, almost across the board, need to really incorporate more whole grains into our diet. And so what I would challenge everyone to do is just look at every source of grain that you're eating now and think, is there a way that I could switch this for a whole grain? And sometimes you make, it's a choice of a sandwich at a place where you're at and there isn't a choice there. So then you think, okay, this is the enriched serving that we're talking about. But those other choices that I do have more control over, what can I do to do that, to change that? And, if it can be the chips that you choose turn into a whole grain corn chip, or you make a snack occasionally of popcorn and your bread choices, there are a lot of really nice, soft, wonderful breads that happen to be 100% whole grain. So don't think of it, if you haven't tried it lately and you think of it as sort of scratchy and just irritating to eat, there's a lot of improvement that's gone into whole grain breads. Even kids would like it, I think. So I'd say keep challenging yourself to incorporate more of those sources into your diet.
That's K-State Research and Extension Nutrition Specialist Sandy Procter. More information on adding whole grains to your diet is available at county and district extension offices and on the extension website, www.ksre.ksu.edu. Sound Living is a weekly public affairs program produced by Research and Extension at Kansas State University. I'm Jeff Wichman, and this is the K-State Radio Network.